It's roughly 12000 years ago. You're standing at the edge of a river. The sun is going down and the air smells like wet grass and wood smoke. You've been walking for 3 days. Your feet are cracked. Your shoulders ache from carrying everything you own. A few stone tools, some dried meat wrapped in hide, maybe a sleeping skin if you're lucky. You look around. There's a cluster of trees to your left, thick enough to block the wind. A flat patch of ground, a rock face nearby that might catch some warmth from tomorrow's morning sun. You study it the way your ancestors have studied every new sleeping spot for the past 100,000 years, not with excitement, but with the same quiet practice calculation of someone who has done this their entire life. You sleep there. It's fine. You move on. And here's the thing that was the default. That was just life. Moving, reading the land, finding shelter wherever the world offered it. No walls, no roof you built yourself, no address. So what happened? What flipped the switch? Because at some point, somewhere, someone decided that sleeping under a roof they had deliberately constructed was better than letting the world provide. And that decision changed the entire human story. The short answer is survival pressure, food, and an almost embarrassing fear of the cold. The long answer is what this video is about. For roughly 95% of the time that anatomically modern humans have existed, we did not build permanent structures. A mobile band of foragers, typically somewhere between 20 and 50 people, followed resources. In the wet season, you moved toward river systems. In the dry season, you pushed into uplands where game browsed the sparse grass. You followed the herds, you followed the fruit, you followed the tubers. If you know you're leaving in 2 weeks, would you spend 3 days hauling timber? No. You'd find a cave, a rock overhang, a dense stand of trees. You'd use what was already there, sleep, eat, and be ready to move again. Every calorie you spent dragging a log into place is a calorie you could have spent finding food. They weren't lazy, they were efficient. Even deeply nomadic groups built temporary structures. A frame of bent branches, maybe some leaves or bark laid over the top, gone in a week. Archaeologists have found potholes, those small circular impressions in ancient soil that mark where a stick once stood upright, dating back 3,000,000 years at sites in Europe and Africa. There was already a seed of architectural thinking in us sitting quietly in the genome waiting for the right conditions to bloom. Let that sit with you. Around 25000 to 20000 years ago, the planet entered the last glacial maximum. The average winter temperature dropped to somewhere between -20 and -30 degrees Celsius. The wind cut across flat treeless steppe with absolutely nothing to stop it. Wood was scarce. Caves were occupied by animals that were significantly less friendly than you. You needed shelter, real shelter, not a pile of leaves. Researchers found something almost impossible: circular structures built from mammoth bones. Not just one, dozens. Ancient humans had stacked the jawbones, tusks, and skulls of woolly mammoths into low circular walls, draped animal hides over a frame of tusks, curved inward, and sealed the whole thing against the Ice Age wind. Some of these structures were nearly 6 meters across. They had central hearths, they had designated sleeping areas. Archaeologists found evidence of storage pits dug into the permafrost floor, the world's first freezers. These people were building homes out of the bones of the largest land animals on the continent, and they were doing it 15000 years before anyone planted the first wheat seed. That is not primitive. That is breathtaking. The evidence at Mejirish suggests people return to the same site year after year. The hearths show multiple episodes of burning the bones, show different stages of weathering. The middens contain layer upon layer of accumulated material. Because mammoths were coming back. The steppe ecology of Ice Age Eastern Europe supported these enormous herds that moved in predictable seasonal corridors. If you knew where the herd would pass in October, you had a reason to be at the same spot in October, which meant you had a reason to build something worth returning to. This is the logic loop that drives the whole transition to permanent housing. Resources become predictable, you return, you invest more, shelter gets elaborate, you're staying. Resources, predictability, return. Those are the gears. Most people imagine the shift from nomadic to settled life as a moment, a discovery, some brilliant ancestor planting a seed, watching it grow and going, oh, I get it now. It wasn't like that. The Neolithic Revolution played out over thousands of years in multiple places completely independently. It wasn't one event. It was more like a wave of slow realizations that swept across different parts of the world at different times. The Fertile Crescent, roughly 10000 BCE. The Yellow River Valley in China, around 7000 BCE. Mesoamerica, around 5000 BCE. Each one separate, each one driven by its own local ecology. Intensive foraging, selective encouragement, casual cultivation, deliberate agriculture, permanent settlement, over and over independently. Researcher Melinda Zeder at the Smithsonian has spent decades studying the archaeobotanical evidence, and what she keeps finding is that it wasn't driven by genius, it was driven by incrementalism. Small decisions: the berries are better near the river, let's camp there longer. Those plants came back in the same spot after the fire, let's not burn that area. The grain is heavy to carry, let's store some here and come back. Nobody invented agriculture, it crept up on them and quietly, almost accidentally staying put, started to make more sense than moving. It's grain. Specifically, it's the need to store grain, or rather, it's the problem that grain creates. When you shift to even semi agricultural life, you suddenly have more food than you can eat right now, which sounds wonderful. It is wonderful. But it is also a massive problem. From moisture, from rats, from other humans, from time. A pit in the ground works for a while, a woven basket works for a while, but if you're storing enough grain to last a community through a winter, potentially thousands of kilograms, you need something serious. You need a structure. You need walls. You need a roof. You need a door that closes. At Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, dating to around 9600 BCE, the surrounding village sites show enormous communal storage facilities built from stone and mud brick hundreds of years before full-scale farming. They were storing surplus wild harvested grain. The storage came first. The architecture followed the food. Your ancestors didn't build houses because they wanted comfort. They built houses because they had too much grain and nowhere to put it. The house was in its original form a grain vault that humans happened to also sleep in, which honestly explains a lot about humanity. When you settle in one place, you accumulate. Not just grain, objects, tools, relationships, status. In a forager, group status is largely fluid. You can't really hoard resources on the move, you'd have to carry everything, and nobody wants to help carry the hoarder's extra stuff. Anthropologist Christopher Bem describes reverse dominance hierarchies, active collective suppression of any individual who tries to accumulate too much power. Someone starts acting like a big shot, the group quietly, systematically humiliates them back into line. Sharing is not optional, it's enforced. A house changes that equation. Behind a wall, things are yours. Inside a granary, your surplus is invisible. The house is the first real private property, and private property is the beginning of inequality. Not inevitably, but structurally. The architecture makes it possible. The house, this cozy, warm, beloved symbol of home and safety, is also the technology that made large-scale social inequality possible for the first time. The walls that keep the weather out are the same walls that keep other people from seeing what you have. Here's a thing nobody warns you about: when your ancestors decide to build a permanent house, you are now stuck. For the first time in human existence, you couldn't just leave when things got bad. If the rains failed and the crops died, your nomadic great-grandparents would have walked away. They had no investment in any particular piece of ground. They went where the food was. You can't walk away from a stone granary. You can't carry a house. You can't disassemble 10 years of terrace fields and take them with you. You are for the first time dependent on a piece of land. And that dependence changes everything about how you interact with other groups who might want the same piece of land. Researchers found clear evidence that violence increased dramatically at the transition to settled life. More healed fractures, more embedded weapon points, more defensive postures in burial positions. Nomadic life was hard and often brutal, but settled life introduced something new, something worth fighting over: a specific place, a specific surplus, territory, war. For the very first time, as a species-wide behavior pattern. They didn't just build houses, they built a logic of ownership. And ownership turned out to be one of the most dangerous ideas humans have ever had. Okay, let's take a breath, because it was also something else. It was home, the sense of a place, a specific fixed known place where you could close the door, sit near the fire, and know that outside the walls was the world and inside the walls was yours. Psychologists have found that the core emotional content of home: safety, warmth, known faces, familiar food is almost universally consistent. People who are forcibly displaced list the loss of home as one of the most psychologically devastating experiences a person can undergo. It was built slowly, over thousands of years, of returning to the same place, of sleeping under the same roof, of knowing that the crack in the wall that looks like a running rabbit was still there this morning, same as it was last year. Your brain learned to love its walls. And that is one of the stranger, warmer, more quietly moving facts about being human. You live in a house, probably, or an apartment, or a flat, or a room, and the odds are extremely high that you have never once thought of it as a technology. You think of it as just where you live. But it is a technology, one of the most consequential ones your species ever developed. Not because it keeps the rain out, not because it keeps the heat in, But because of what it did to the way humans organize themselves, the house enabled agriculture by protecting the harvest. It enabled inequality by creating privacy. It enabled warfare by creating territory. It enabled cities by anchoring populations to single points on the map. And somewhere in all of that, it also enabled something else, the long, slow construction of a feeling. A feeling so specific and so human that we made up a whole word for it. Home. Every time your ancestors came back to the same fire, the same sleeping skin pressed into the same spot of worn ground, the same faces gathered around the same warmth, they were building something no one planned. Something that ran deeper than survival. They were building the feeling of having a place to return to. And 12000 years later, you still feel it. Every time you walk through your door, drop your keys on the counter and let your shoulders come down. That's not just instinct, that's inheritance. So here's where I'll leave you. If you could go back, stand at that inflection point in the ancient Fertile Crescent 10000 years ago, knowing that saying yes to the house meant saying yes to the grain and to the granary and to the war and to everything that followed, knowing all of that, would you still build it? Leave that in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if you made it this far, thank you. That means you're exactly the kind of person this channel was made for.